The cyber threat landscape really prides itself on being unpredictable. That's one of our challenges when we come to predict what will happen in the future. So really the way we approach this from our research perspective is that we ask ourselves what are the most notable trends that we've been seeing in the cyber threat landscape throughout the past year or 2 years. We also look at to see what's new in the IT space, and then we make projections that are based on these trends that we've been seeing.
So what will you stress on the most important trends right now?
Okay, so the first trend that we've been seeing, and that has started in 2018, is a major shift in terms of the malware towards cryptojackers. These are malware that mine for cryptocurrency at someone else's expense. Using someone else's CPU's power, someone else's cooling expenses, and someone else's infrastructure in order to mine for cryptocurrency that later goes to the attacker. This represents probably what would be considered the holy grail of attacks because it's a very stealthy type of malware. You wouldn't always notice it. It really slows down your CPU maybe. That's the side effect that you as the victim would notice. So you're not inclined to deal with it immediately necessarily. And on the flip side, it represents a huge benefit, potential revenue benefit for the attacker because the cryptocurrency valuation has been on a fairly significant rise in 2018. And now, starting in 2019, that we are seeing another rise in their valuation, we see a similar trend. We see crypto miners continue to dominate the malware world.
So have you developed security systems for that attack?
There isn't necessarily a dedicated security system that deals with crypto miners. It's from a protection standpoint, it's not that different from any other malware. Essentially, the malware penetrates the system in one of the known attack vectors using some exploitation technique or another. And from that point, it would do whatever the attacker deems most profitable at any given point in time. So in the past, it may have been, a banking Trojan or an info stealer. And later in 2017, we've seen a huge rise in ransomware. And then starting in 2018, we see more use of cryptojackers. There isn't that much of a difference from the protection standpoint. It's really preventing the attack the ability to exploit the attack vector, and then whatever the payload may be, if we prevented it from the get-go, you wouldn't even have to deal with it.
So that was the first trend.
Yes, that would be the first trend. The other, another trend that's worth mentioning, it's not so much a trend, it's more of an observation, I would say, is that still, even though it's 2019 and there's a lot of sophistication in how attacks are being perpetrated and which infrastructure is being attacked, notably with the introduction of mobile and cloud infrastructure into everyone's IT infrastructure, those assets are being attacked. But still what we see is that most attacks are really using very simple means. It's not necessarily, from a numbers perspective, most of the attacks are not necessarily using sophisticated nation-grade type of vulnerabilities and exploits, but rather using things like ancient old vulnerabilities in servers that could have been patched, or abusing the human element where people are tricked into doing all sorts of unsafe activities, and it's easier than one would think to trick someone to actually do something that they know full well that they shouldn't have, but they were somehow absent-minded at that particular point in time. Sometimes even the most sophisticated actors are using these simple means simply because it's very successful still in this day and age.
So is it actually possible to teach people how to prevent, not click or not act on an email, for example?
It's always a combination of things. You can teach people and people will be more minded to it and more people will not click on more links. Can you get to 100% protection with that? I would argue that you can't.
Oh, okay.
You can never assume that. Even people, that are very security savvy professionals would tell you that at one point or another they didn't think something through and they got infected because they did something they shouldn't have. That's just reality.
And finally, the third trend.
Well, the third trend that is very important for everyone to know of is that the cybercrime industry has matured, and it is now not. It's no longer those, few guys in the basement thinking of ways to attack. This is a full-blown, very sophisticated industry that offers training services and all sorts of training programs and services that are being sold online. And you can buy components and you can buy full-blown campaigns and you can do any one of these things, regardless of what skill level you're at. You can take part in the cybercrime industry, either as a seller, as a buyer, as an attacker. There are many ways to take part in this. It's a very lucrative industry, sadly for all of us. It makes a lot of money, and it's growing. More and more people are taking part in this. Part of it also comes from the fact that weapons that used to be considered state-sponsored with a much higher level of sophistication are now finding their way into the cybercrime industry, either because people that used to work for the government are now moving into the private sector, or because tools are leaked. And then the sophistication level of the attacks that we see coming from cybercrime syndicates become more sophisticated as well.
That sounds pretty depressing, right?
Well,
so how to prevent? How should customers think and act about this?
I think the way to think about protection, I would say cyber protection, there are several key things that you have to keep in mind. First of all, I would say that before you get to deploy any security product, you need to make sure that you have proper, what we call IT hygiene, basically keeping your systems up to date, at the right patch level, not leaving any loopholes of things that you will get to next week or next month. You always have to have good coverage and good hygiene across the board. That goes into segmentation of your network, that goes into training of your employees, and that goes into patching systems, et cetera, et cetera. Once you're done with that, which is still the most important thing that you could do for security, you still need the help of security products, because there are those more sophisticated attacks that know very easily how to bypass even a clean, well-maintained network or infrastructure. And to that extent, when it comes to products, you always have to think about two things. First of all, is that you should always prefer prevention over detection. Prevention is when the attack is not even allowed through, whereas detection is to detect something after it was allowed through. And in the speed that some attacks can operate, this is the difference between a catastrophe that would now take you hours, days, weeks, months to recover from, versus something that is just, a blip on your log. That you don't even need to worry about. So that is wherever prevention is possible, choose prevention.
Of course,
Second thing is that you need to always remember that security, and this has been true forever and ever, it's also true in the physical world, protection, prevention, security always comes in layers. You cannot assume that you will have a single silver bullet that would protect you from everything. It doesn't exist. It will not exist in the foreseeable future. I don't know about I can't predict the longer-term future, but for the foreseeable one, there will not be a silver bullet. So protection always comes in layers, and that means you don't rely on a single layer of protection, but rather you use the IPS and you use the sandbox and you use the cloud protections where you need to, and you protect your endpoints. You need to do all of that. And that's the sad truth. And then when you consider all of these requirements, which are pretty significant in the matrix that they represent, you realize that you will not be able to do that if you spread yourself thin across dozens of different vendors, each with their own different mindset. I'm not claiming you should standardize on a single vendor, but I am claiming that you should strive to have as many of these technologies integrated, coming on top of a single platform that allows you the manageability that you need. Because a poorly managed security system is worse than not having one. It gives you the perception of security without the actual security.
Sounds very reasonable. Thank you so much, Orli Gan.
Sure.
Thank you.